Okay, so here we go again with shelter severity classification. This is our system to do the shelter needs analysis, estimate the needs, and produce our shelter needs overview, meet our commitments to the HPC, and so on. This will be a series of sessions. Today, we will have a brief on the SSC, and we will see how we can implement the SSC with household level data set, means MSNA assessment or any other household level assessment. Next week, on the same time, we will have another session on how to implement the SSC with other data sets. Means if you have area level data set, or you don't have any assessment, but you depend on secondary data analysis and so on. So other type of information sources. And we will look at how we can produce the analysis and adjust the results of the initial analysis of the SSC based on some evidence and some other factors that we can inject in our analysis. Week after, so means Thursday after, we will look at GF and the role of the shelter cluster in the GF process, which is the intersectoral process that happens with OCHA, but we have a role in that process ourselves as shelter cluster. And we will look at the shelter needs overview versus the HNRP, HNO, HRP, and so on. So what is the shelter needs overview and how it can contribute to the other strategic documents at the country level, at intersectoral level. So basically, this is kind of overall agenda of what will be happening in this series of 3 sessions. So to start with, a little bit of a background. SSC was launched last year in May, and we organized a series of webinars and trainings. One of them was in person during the Shelter Week last year, and we tried to implement the SSC in 14 countries. It was a successful implementation, and we had a good lesson learned exercise afterwards. We organized a brief on that exercise in April to learn more and to share the output, so the outcomes of that exercise with all of you. So why we started with the SSC? Because we collectively, not we as global shelter cluster, collectively, all of us as shelter cluster members, at country level, at global level, we recognize that there's a need to improve and to standardize the way in which shelter needs are looked at, are measured, analyzed, what is the severity of shelter needs, who is in need of shelter, humanitarian shelter, and so on. So with that was the primary driver or trigger to develop the SSC. Developing the SSC allowed us to have improved evidence-based decision-making processes, improved advocacy, improved funding prioritization for the sector, improved response planning, and so on. So basically, it positioned ourselves as shelter cluster in any context in a better position versus other clusters within our community, with our partners. We have more robust and solid analysis that we can base our responses on. Ultimately, to create better impact on the lives of the people we care about and we serve there. So objectives of the SSC, mainly we have 3 objectives. First of all, to undertake an analysis of the context to understand the context where we work. What are the shocks? What are the drivers for shelter needs? What are the vulnerabilities in the communities where we work, and so on. To understand all of this and how they affect the population or the people that we work for. The second objective, based on that understanding of the context, we need to determine the level of severity of shelter needs and estimate the number of people in need for shelter, humanitarian shelter. And this is important for us that actually this is the basis for us to start our response planning. And then to see how we are improving the lives of the people we serve. The third objective is to identify possible contributors to the shelter severity and pain, and intend to possible impacts of unmet shelter needs. And I will really emphasize on this last sentence, the possible impacts on unmet shelter needs. This is important. Why? Because it is a huge advocacy piece here with donors to understand what is the cost of no action for humanitarian shelter, and what will be the impact if we meet those needs. So this is really important for us to look at from these lenses. All in all, these three objectives, they contribute to the development of what we call the shelter cluster strategic document, the shelter needs overview. So this document, we started talking about it last year. We didn't manage to implement or develop any of this because there were more countries working on the HNO and HRP. But this year, we hope that this document can be developed and to be the basis for shelter cluster planning, be the basis for shelter cluster advocacy plans as well, and be the basis for the shelter cluster commitments or requirements to HNO, HRP, HNRP, whatever it's called in your country. The analytical framework of the SSC looks like this, as you see on the screen. Here you see three parts, three colors. First one is the blue, which is more on the factors, contributing factors to shelter needs. What is the context? And if you remember, we were talking about the three objectives. So this more or less on the objective one. What is the context? What are the vulnerabilities? And what are the capacities at both household level and at community level? So understanding what is the situation in the country where we work. Then to understand the shock of an event that happened in that country, whether it's a conflict, earthquake, floods, whatever event that triggered the activation of the shelter cluster in that country, together with other humanitarian needs and conditions at household and community level. So that shock didn't create only shelter needs, but created other needs, protection, food, health, etc. So we need to understand those as well, because they are interlinked with shelter needs. So understanding of all of these contributing factors, let's say, we will be able to move to our next objective, which is to estimate the severity of the shelter needs and who are the people in need of humanitarian shelter. And for that, we look at it from three triangular perspectives, from three dimensions. Pillar one is the shelter itself. Pillar two, the living conditions within the shelter. And pillar three, the conditions around the shelter, the settlement. With this understanding, or with this distinction of these three pillars, we are moving in our discourse of shelter cluster from talking about a structure, a physical structure for shelter, to the notion of home. So people are able to live, because this is our objective. Having the structure itself alone doesn't allow people to live inside. It contributes to that, yes, but doesn't allow them to, they might have other needs. As well, having that structure isolated doesn't allow people to live. So these three dimensions together creates that sense of home, that sense of safety, that sense of protection, that sense of life for those people that we are trying to serve. So we need to understand the shelter needs from these three, using these three dimensions. Based on that, we move towards our third objective. So the impact of shelter conditions, where, so those conditions that we see in one context, in one country, how they impact other humanitarian needs, how they impact the lives of the people, how meeting those shelter needs will impact the life of the people, how unmeeting those shelter needs will impact the lives of the people, whether in shelter or in other clusters or in other sectors. So if you don't have a shelter, how this will impact your health. If you don't have a shelter, how that will impact your protection, your safety, your stability in the location where you live, and so on. So this is how we move from objective 1 to objective 3 using this kind of systematized understanding or analysis of the context, then narrowing down to shelter needs, and then looking at impacts of those needs, whether we meet them or we don't meet them. So to start with here, with the shelter needs severity, we look at it from 5 severity scale. I guess most of the humanitarian practitioners in any cluster, they are familiar with this 5 scale. Minimal, stressed, crisis, critical, and catastrophic. They go from almost 0 up to 100, up to 10, whatever you call it. Each one has a definition here. Each one has a definition at household level and at area level, as you see in the next slide. So if we look at the definitions, minimal shelter needs, people are able to live in adequate dwellings, can perform all typical core domestic life or functions. They have adequate access to basic services and infrastructure around their shelter. They have normal lives. They don't need us as a humanitarians in phase 1. And it goes slightly worse and worse up to catastrophic, where people are living or they don't have, has no shelter, or they living in severely damaged shelter or dwellings. They are unable to perform their domestic life. They cannot cook, they cannot sleep, they cannot store food, they don't have access to energy, they don't have access to anything as well. Their immunity is not functioning as well. Their settlement is not functioning. So there's no infrastructure, no other basic services, and so on. So moving from severity phase 1 to severity phase 5, you will see gradual degradation of the available services or available or the shelter conditions. With that understanding at the household level, now we are talking about one household. So each household matters here. Each household has its own severity of shelter needs, and we need to understand that. Once we have that understanding, we can move to area level severity, and with that, for this, we apply the 20% rule. So I'll start from the catastrophic one. If you have at least 20% of the households in one community living in conditions, in catastrophic conditions, then it means that area has catastrophic shelter conditions. If you have less than 20%, then the situation is not catastrophic. It's still bad, but it's not catastrophic. Now we look at severity 4. If 20% of the population households are living in conditions described in severity 4 and 5, then it means the situation is critical here. And so on. If it is less, we move down to level 3. If 20% living in 3, 4, and 5, then those people, the condition in that area will be level 3, and so on to level 2 and level 1. So basically, we are applying just having normal distribution here for each phase, saying 20% for each phase. And whenever we meet the 20%, starting from the high end backwards to the low end, whenever we meet the 20% of population living in the scale of severity or above, then it means that this is the correct or the severity phase that describes the shelter situation in that area. Back to the 3 pillars. So pillar 1, when we talk about people have a dwelling, it is the structure itself, the physical conditions of the structure, whether it is a tent, an apartment, a makeshift shelter, and so on. We are looking at that structure, that physical structure that surrounds us or we live within. Pillar 2, if we are able to live properly in those dwellings, and this corresponds to the living conditions, your day-to-day life, what usually a normal person does in their daily life. We sleep, we eat, we drink, we perform hygiene, etc. The third one, we don't live only within our shelter, but we go out. We go out to access market, we go out to buy food, we go out to seek health services, we go out to seek some livelihood, we go out to seek education, etc. And this corresponds to the notion of the community. Together, all of them corresponds to the notion of home. So people will have a home to live within, and this is our ultimate objective, that households are able to live with dignity, with security of tenure, in adequate dwelling with access. And here we need to emphasize on this as well, with access to community level services and infrastructure. So they are not isolated as well, because we are social beings as a human, and this is important to continue to have that community around us. For each pillar, we identified some core indicators and sub-indicators that will allow us to measure the severity for each one. Now we are moving to some details, and slowly we will see how we will shift towards some demo and presentation of how the tool can be implemented. So for pillar 1, as we said, people or households living in safe and dignified dwelling. And what does that mean? That means a level of safety and security provided by the shelter, defects, issues, damage, location, environment. Location and environment here means that it's not in, the shelter is not located in a flood-prone area or landslide-prone area or something like that. Then the level of privacy provided by the shelter, and this means internal and external privacy, both. And here you see in the example overcrowding, partitions. So the examples are on the internal, but as well, you have to look at the external privacy, that shelter can be locked, shelter can be, has windows, doors, etc., and so on to protect from the outside interventions. Indicator 3 is the level of thermal comfort provided by the shelter. Protection against the weather means against heat, against cold, against rain, against floods, all weather conditions. And indicator 4, level of security of tenure. So people are not at the risk of being evicted from their shelters or from the land where they live. This indicator can be used under Pillar 1 or under Pillar 3 based on the context where you feel it's more about notion of community, then you can use it under Pillar 3 or under Pillar 1 if it is more related to one-to-one issues, and depends on the context. Moving to Pillar 2, so people or households are living in functional domestic space. Ability to cook, ability to store food and water, ability to sleep, ability to perform personal hygiene, ability to access electricity or energy, ability to perform other domestic functions as relevant to your context. I'll be back to the perform personal hygiene. Here someone might ask, but isn't this under wash cluster, for example? Yes and no. Yes, if you are looking at it from a wash perspective, and no, if you are looking at it from an FI perspective. For example, to be able to wash your hands, you need clean water, and this is wash. But to be able to wash your hands, you need to have a bucket to put the water in before you wash your hands. So it depends on how you look at it. And it's important here when we move towards the questionnaires and MSNA and assessments and so on, to ensure that you capture that perspective in your assessments. Pillar 3 can include access to education, healthcare, electricity, water, sanitation, transportation, market, according to your context as well. Whether you are working in camp settings, whether you are working on urban settings, and so on. So all matters here. So the implementation steps for the SSC. Here, I mean, like before moving to the other one, here we're done with the theoretical part of the SSC. What is the SSC? What are the components? What are the indicators that the SSC encapsulates, and so on. Now we will move towards the HPC and how the SSC fits and will be implemented within the HPC, and what are the steps are needed for that. So mainly we have 4 steps. The first one is to define your information needs. And mainly in protracted crisis, this task is already known. This task is all kind of ongoing always and be updated always. If you are in a sudden onset, you need to know what you don't know. You need to know what is needed for you to plan your response. And based on that, you perform your data collection. You do your secondary data analysis, you do your primary data collection, you participate in MSNA, you have a shelter specific assessments, you have a damage assessment, whatever it is, data collection. Based on your data collection, we have the SSC analysis, and the SSC analysis goes into the shelter needs overview. That is the ultimate or the final product of this process. So looking at this process and the roles and responsibilities here in these 4 steps. The first one is mainly coordinator, partners, task, of course, with the support of the IMOs to map what is available, what is not available, what is missed, and so on. Moving to data collection, here it gets more towards the IMOs with the any partner who is implementing the assessment and so on, to ensure the data collection is happening correctly, happening at the scale that is needed, data is collected and stored securely, and so on. All of these assessment principles that we need to take care of. Analysis, here we come again. Mainly, it is an IMO task to crunch the data if we are talking about household level data and so on, and do all of those, like basic statistical analysis. But the word analysis doesn't stop here. It goes beyond creating a pivot table, beyond creating some statistics out of the data set. It goes to understand, to analyze the shoulder situation. And here again, we should have the coordinator, technical coordinator, partners involved in this process to ensure that we have a common understanding, an accurate understanding that really reflects the situation in the country. Once that is done, here we go back to more weight towards the coordinators to summarize all of that analysis in this strategic document that is called Shelter Needs Overview. Of course, again, with the support of the rest of the team and so on. But it's important to realize here the role of each one in the team in each step. So it starts heavily with the coordinators, and it ends heavily with the coordinators. In the middle, it goes heavily towards the IMOs. As a timeline, usually it is more or less with the goes in the same direction or in line with the HPC. We recommend that you start early in the year to define your information needs. Usually, I mean, if MSNA is implemented in the country, usually REACH is one doing the MSNA, and they start early in the year designing the questionnaire. So define your information needs early in the year, understand what you need, understand your context, and so on. Step 2 goes data collection between June and August. Step 3, August, September, where we are now on the SSC analysis. I heard from many of you that data collection is happening in the countries already. My data might not be shared yet, but it will come soon. So get ready for that. And get ready for that, we will see. I'll tell you now what I mean by what get ready with. Your analysis grid, we will come to this concept in a bit, should be ready even before you receive the data set. And then once your analysis is done, you produce your shelter needs overview, you summarize it in the HNO chapter, you even more summarize it if it's an HNRP, you have only one paragraph, and so on. But that will not be super reflective and super useful for you to have only one paragraph to present the needs. So the shelter needs overview is your strategic document here. So now let's go step by step. How do you determine your information needs, and what type of data do you usually use to inform decision making? These are the two main questions that we need to ask ourselves at the beginning of the year. February, March. What do we know? What did we have last year of information? What is the situation? What are the new things happening this year? What do we miss? And so on. And for that, like, if you look at the list below, you have the primary data collection, MSNA whenever possible. This is one way. You can do secondary data analysis to inform different parts of the SSC analysis. And this is important to perform early in the year to know what other reports available, what other clusters are doing, and so on. Use the existing data and analysis in the GF, because in the GF, I'll go back a little bit. You see the blue part here? In the GF, they have the same, more or less. So all information that you need about the context, about the vulnerabilities, about the capacities, about the shock and event and the humanitarian conditions, and so on, they are already available in the GF. Usually, GF implementation should happen as well early in the year. So basically, When you are defining your information needs and your data sources, look at what is happening at the intersectoral level. What's happening with the GF, because this information will be already analyzed, summarized, and so on. And continuously, this is so important for you, continuously maintain your evidence list. Whenever you hear about anything, whenever you will get any piece of information, document it, reference it, document it, and reference it. We have a template for that in the tool. We will see it, but it's important for you to document and reference all the evidence about your country cluster, about the situation in your country, and so on. This is important for you, that will allow you to adjust and perform some crunching and adaptation of the quantitative analysis of the SSC. With the GF, as you see here, again, if you see in the red box here, we have the context, shocks, impact at system level, at population level. All of this information will be available for you. And then you see in the sectoral needs, we have the shelter sectoral tools. Here we are talking about the SSC that will contribute to the intersectoral needs analysis. So we produce this, we use this to produce this one. So, and we contribute to the GF requirement at the intersectoral level. So make sure that you are aware of this. We will talk more about the GF in the third session, but make sure that you are engaged, actively engaged in the intersectoral processes. So the evidence list, again, it's a repository. It's included in the SSC calculation tool. It is aligned. The template that we have created in the tool is aligned with the analytical framework. So basically, we are talking about evidence about shocks and events, evidence about vulnerability and capacity, evidence about the context, about the shelter needs, the shelter itself, the living conditions. So it is more or less categorized by these elements. So make sure that you document and collect all of this information throughout the year, not only a month before the SSC analysis. This is a continuous process. Otherwise, it won't be useful for you.
Mr. Hussein, sorry for interruption. If I can ask a question here.
If you allow me to finish the presentation, please, I'll come back to all questions.
Okay, please go ahead.
Then, thank you. For data collection, make sure that if MSNA happening in your country cluster, make sure that the shelter section in the MSNA is aligned with your information needs. We, at global level, at Global Shelter Cluster, worked with REACH at global level to put some questions, indicators, information there that are aligned with the SSC as we see it from Global Shelter Cluster. But SSC is meant to be contextualized, is meant to be adapted as you need in the country. And for that, you need to make sure that the MSNA or the questions that are there in the MSNA from global level are adapted to your need. This is there's no tolerance here, because you will miss the point. You will miss the information that will be collected and they will not serve you. And this usually happens March, April. I remember I had some discussions with some of you as well during that period about the MSNA and the discussion happening between REACH and the clusters at the country level on the MSNA questionnaire. Also, make sure that you get involved in the enumerator training. This is important as well, because enumerators, they need to know what do you mean by each question, what are the nuances of each question, how to ask the question, and how to collect the response. This is important for you to make sure that part of the training is happening. Do a pilot, work closely with the organization or with the team that is doing the data collection or implementing the assessment to have this is reflective to your information needs and that you will be able to use that information. Now we're moving to the second step on calculating severity and pain. So first of all, we said you design your questionnaire. Once you design your questionnaire, you agreed on the questionnaire with the assessment agency, you can start filling your analysis grid. You can start distributing your data elements into the pillars and how you will sum up them to generate the severity and the pain. After you receive the data, you have to format your data set, drop out all the columns that you don't need, etc. Some data cleaning and structuring. And then you calculate the severity score for each pillar, for each household. Now we are talking about household level assessments using the analysis grid itself. The analysis grid can be prepared before data collection. The calculations will happen after. So you can basically more or less finalize everything before the data collection. You still have to do, I mean, here I'm talking to the IMOs. You still need to do some formulas, some data crunching here to make sure that your formula reflects what you have in the analysis grid. Once you get the severity score of each household by pillar, you will have the final severity score of that household based on the decision tree. We'll see that in a bit. Then you determine the area level severity based on how many is the percentage of the household living in each severity phase using the 20% rule. With that, you can calculate the percentage of each household living in any severity level. You can get your PIN from the percentage of people who living in severity 3, 4, or 5. Finally, the adjustment, but this will be talking about it next Thursday in the next webinar. So basically, this is the flow of the analysis, and this goes from step 2 to step 4C on the IMO. Designing the questionnaire and filling the analysis grid should happen hand in hand between the IMO and the coordinator with your SAG, with your partners. You decide. But it is more on the coordinator side here to decide what piece of information inform which indicator and what is the weight that each indicator will take in the analysis, and so on. Adjustments, we come to evidence, we come to expert judgment, we come to expert reviews with the partners, with the SAG, and so on, of the results that you will get from the quantitative analysis. So let's go to some Excel now. This is the tool that we have. It is the same tool from last year. We just updated the MSNA questionnaire here according to the one that we are using this year. So basically, you have the README, you have the core indicators defined here, the questionnaire, I would not call it the standard, but the agreed upon globally the MSNA questionnaires for shelter section. This has to be, and I guess it has been adapted at the country level, but you need to be aware and know what are the questions that you have and which indicators they serve. And for example, here, if I talk about indicator 1, indicator 1.1, I have 3 questions actually that informs this indicator. And once I have this understanding of level of severity and security provided by the shelter, defects, etc., what I'm asking in the assessment, I'm asking what best describes the shelter situation of this household. So what is the type of the shelter, where they live? What is the type of the shelter? And then what are issues the shelter has on the damage, lack of privacy, etc., etc. So if I look at the questions and the responses, I need to map this out into my analysis grid. In the analysis grid, for each sub-indicator, you have 3 levels. Here, you have safe, not safe, and not safe, life-threatening. And for each level, for each criteria here, you have a score. These scores, we have designed these scores from our side. At country level, you can adjust the scores, of course. You can add more granular criteria if you want, but we don't recommend that unless you have a solid data set, really solid data set that you trust, fully trust. Otherwise, we believe that this is enough to look at. For each indicator, we have it at the same, in the same way. For each indicator, you have a criteria of different level, and for each criteria, you have a score. So, for example, here, if the shelter is safe, means there's no severity, the score is 0. This doesn't go in the severity of the shelter needs. The shelter is safe. There's no need here. And how I know that the shelter is secure? In the analysis grid, I have all the questions, as you see, from the MSNA. So all the questions, these questions should be on the columns here. All of these questions. And based on that, for question 1, in question 1, if the cluster, if population lives in the open, they don't have a cluster, for example, this one. This means that their life is threatened, they are at risk, and they feel under this criteria. What does it mean? The shelter is not safe, but not yet life-threatening. Well, it has some issues, some damage, etc. Structural damage for the doors, for the walls, but not for the columns or for the roof, for example. It's not at risk of collapsing and so on. But also, there are other questions that they contribute to this, and you will be filling all of these options and questions under each question. For each question, you will get the correspondent answer to each criteria. Once you have this analysis grid finalized for each of the indicators based on the questionnaires that you have here, then you can move on to do your analysis, the household level analysis. We'll come to this. So on the analysis grid, I'll stop here. I'll go back to the presentation and continue from there. As I said, once we have the analysis grid is done, we can start the calculation based on the household level data set. If you remember, we said that you have to format your data set. So you have the ID of each row in your data set, your population group, the admin level, the location, the community, admin 3, whatever it is in the country. And then you have all the columns of your data set, right? Everything. Then, based on this data set and based on the decision tree, the decision tree is organized or defined based on the definitions that we have for each severity phase. So we have pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3, and for each combination of scores, under each pillar, you have a final score. Here, what you see, if people have a score 5 for the shelter itself, for the dwelling, it means that no matter what NFIs they have, or no matter what services around them are, their situation is fine. It's catastrophic because they are not unable to live, basically, because the structure is the primary element to have to enable pillar 2 and to enable pillar 3. So if you don't have the pillar 1, the shelter, the severity is fine. Then if you have it but with some issues, then we start talking. If the other elements are at the catastrophic level, I mean, crisis level, then the score changes according to that. We try to follow the definitions that we have presented on the slides to define the final score of each level, all of them. And here you have the full list of combinations between all pillars. One important point, if you look, so pillar 1 can go to severity 5 to catastrophic. Pillar 2 and pillar 3, they cannot go up to catastrophic situation. They stop at 4 because they cannot create a catastrophic situation for a household alone. That's why they stop at 4. If you look at the scores here that we suggested, no access to services, we start with score 1, and if you sum it, then it stops at 4. Here, if you look at this, it's 3.2 plus 1 is 4.2, means 4. But with the shelter itself, it goes up to 5. So basically, we highly recommend you don't change this part unless is really needed and is really justified, and that has to be documented. And you will be asked for the documentation actually by the intersectoral group doing the GF. And we highly recommend not doing this, changing this. You follow the scores of the 3 pillars and the decision tree as it is, because it meets the definitions. And if you change here, it means that you are not okay with the definitions of the severity phases, and then you have to justify why you are not okay with the severity phases definitions. This is important to capture there. So you have your household data set, you have your decision tree, you know, here I'm talking to the IMOs, you know now to determine if the shelter is safe. It means that it has to be a house. It means to be an apartment. It means to not have any damage or any recognizable issues, and so on. So you know this in a descriptive way. You have the data set. You know which column corresponds to which piece of information. Now it's your role to do this formula. Your Excel skills here will be tested, because for each element, you will have multiple columns contributing to it. You will have multiple ifs, elses. You will have multiple VLOOKUPs, index, search, etc. So make sure that you refresh your Excel formula skills. This is really important for you. Once you do, you define the formula for each of the criteria. If you look at this row here, you have the criteria for pillar 1 from the analysis grid. These are the ones. These ones. All of them with their scores. So these criteria, these scores, they go here, as you see. Once you have these formulas here done for you, the colored columns, you don't touch them. They already done for you. The calculation will happen immediately by itself. Of course, you need to populate in the beginning your household ID, your population group, your admin level, similar to these ones. So this part from A to H, this part from A to H should be identical. Means the order doesn't matter because we are using the VLOOKUP for sure, but it's better to be in the same order as well. And then you have the score for pillar 1, the score for pillar 2, and the score for pillar 3. And based on that, we apply a decision tree. Based on the 3 scores, we will have the overall household level severity score. If I put this at 5 here, you see immediately this changed to 5. All colored columns pre-populated with the correct formulas. You don't need to worry about them. And then from here, everything is done. If we move to the next part, you have your admin levels and population groups with the population figures that you receive from OCHA at the beginning of the year or during the process. And all of this calculation is happening for you in the tool. We will update the tool and we will share with you after the session during next week. So don't worry about any issues that you might see now in this tool, because we were working on it and trying and testing it. So you will have the percentage of household living in severity phase 1, in phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. And based on this, we apply the 20% rule to get the preliminary area severity score and the number of people in need. Then you can adjust the severity score. You can, but you need to justify why you adjusted it. Here we have some flags. If it is a high pin, low pin, if the distribution of the population in the severity phases seems to be irregular. For example, you have 20% in severity 5 and then 80% in severity 1. This seems to be a regular instance. So everyone living okay, and 20% living in catastrophic situation. So this needs to be, there should be some attention to these instances, for example. If you have a severity outlier, for example, like, for example, and in one admin 2, for example, if we are doing the analysis in admin 3, in one admin 2, you have 10 admin 3, 10 areas, and all of them with severity 3, and only one with severity 5. So we need to pay attention to that one, severity 5. Why? And if it is correct, it's correct, but just this is to flag it, and this will help you in your analysis as well. You can add more flags as you want here, as you need. Based on that, you will have your population in need figure. Important here to notice that population in need figure, you might have an area level severity 1, like this one, for example, and you have the 3% in severity 4. So the overall severity score of this area is 1, but still you have some people in need in that area. So the PIN number is the total people who really needs shelter or humanitarian shelter, regardless if the rest of the population in their area living in better or worse condition. So we are really looking at the people here when we talk about people in need. We don't look at the area level severity and say only areas with severity 3, 4, 5 will contribute to the PIN. This is a wrong statement. Everyone who has a severity 3, 4, 5, no matter what the severity score of the area, is in the PIN. This has to be clear for everyone. So here, if I look at it, for example, here are some examples in the slides. So in severity, if in pillar 1, I have severity 3, pillar 2, severity 4, and pillar 3, severity 5, for example, the overall will be 4, and so on. So this is just kind of a visual presentation of the decision tree. Depends on the severity score for each household. So here we are looking at each household. We see it for each household. What is it, as we have seen here? What is the pillar 1? What's the pillar 2? And what's the pillar 3? And then we have the overall severity score for this household is automatically calculated. And this is what we are showing here on this slide. To get the area level severity, so here we are looking at this slide, or this part of the tool. I have the total population, IDP is 1,000. I am in admin unit A. I have 41% in severity 1, 40% in severity 2, 3 in severity 4, 8% in severity 4, and in 5. So in total, this should be 100, right? Similarly for each one of them. And this is what will be populated for, automatically populated for you here. You just need to populate from A to H. This is on you. This information comes according to your country, according to the population groups that you have, and according to the population figures. And then these figures will be automatically and percentages automatically calculated. The third step is to have the overall severity score for the admin area and the people in need. From this example, if we look at it, the overall severity score should be 2 because at it's 8, 8, 16, 3, 19. We still didn't reach to 20%. With 40, 19 is 40, 59, more than 20%. So severity of this area is 2. Yet we have some people in need because we have 19% in severity 3, 4, 5 multiplied by the total population is 190. So this is our pin figure in admin unit A for population group IDPs. Similarly, for the other examples. And the total population group will be the sum of the total pin number, population in need, will be the sum of the people in need for all areas or population groups. So briefly here on the adjustment on the step 6, the final step is once you calculate the pin and severity, you should have an analysis workshop to present your findings to your partners, to your SAG, to your team members, and everyone, and reflect on those figures. Are they correct based on what we know, based on our evidence list? That's important, and I re-emphasize on this, based on any secondary data analysis that we might have, based on some other information that might be available for us or made available after we did the data collection and so on, some based on some shocks or events that happened after the data collection and so on. And then you can adjust the severity score and the population in need based on this information, but you need to justify your adjustment, and those justification has to be documented and they have to be rational. They have to be logical, and you have to follow the same concept in your adjustment throughout your country. Not in one area I follow one principle, in another area I follow another principle. Yes, the information sources might be different, but you follow the same principles when you adjust. With this, I think I met my 1 hour. I will leave it now for questions and discussions. I didn't go a lot in the calculations here and the formulas and so on, because you can see more about this as well in the recording from last year. You can see more about that by doing, actually, and especially I'm talking to the IMOs here to familiarize yourself with this Excel template. And if you face issues, we at the global level, the IM team, are available to support you with this process. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment and see if there are any questions. Okay, I see a couple of questions in No, one question. What if we don't consider pillar 3 because we couldn't collect related data? How we final score would be? Good. If we are talking of the today's session, mainly, we are talking about household level data sets, mainly with MSNAs, and then for sure you have pillar 3. But to answer your question, you don't need necessarily to have household level data for each pillar. You can project, if you have area level data, we will see that next Thursday. If you have area level data for some information and household level data for other information, you can project that. You can do some estimations on the populations, and you can figure it out. If it is only for everything non-household level data, you still able to implement and calculate the SSC. But if you have household level data, this means that you get all the information ready for you there from other clusters. And if, let me share my screen again. If I go back to this Excel and the MSNA questionnaire, for this year, all of these questions indicators, indicator 3% of household with access to appropriate common services and infrastructure. We see access to education is available, access to drinking water, access to sanitation, access to hand washing facility. This is coming from WASH cluster. So we are talking about communal services here. You have what else? Some questions on the situation, the protection situation, if they had to flee several times or not, or it's just only once. Is coming from protection. From health, you have access to health. These are the basic questions coming from other clusters in the assessment. But make sure here, this is an important point to make sure of is we don't look at those information from health perspective. So we need to look at it from shelter perspective. So access to health. Is it because of my shelter I don't have access to health? Or means the health facility is not there, means the my shelter is far away from the health facility or the education facility, and so on. So it is because of the location of my shelter. My shelter doesn't allow me to benefit from those services, or the services are not available in that community at all. So this matters for us as shelter cluster. But if I don't have access to health because I am a returnee, not an IDP, for example, this is not related to the shelter. This is related to protection cluster, related to shelter, to health cluster to address. You cannot do anything as shelter cluster to ensure that this person or this household has access to the health facility or education facility. Other clusters can do. And this is how we need to look at the indicators from other clusters and make sure that they make sense for us as shelter cluster from our own perspective. If we do something on shelter, we will enable that access. This is what it really means on pillar 3. I hope this is clear. I have one hand up, Jahid.
Thank you very much, Hussein Ahmed. Indeed, it was a very informative presentation, very professional and technical. This needs a lot of exercises to deeply understand how we calculate this. However, I have two questions. One, as shelter cluster, we usually deal with emergencies. For example, here in Afghanistan this year, we have faced many flash floods, thousands of houses has been destroyed. So I think this severity classifications we are doing, especially MCNA, we are doing once in a year, and there would be a gap in terms of the real calculation of needs. So this is one question, how that it can respond to those needs, because in here and there in different regions of Afghanistan we have experience plus this year, and I believe the MECNA and the calculation that we had at the beginning of the year does not really correspond to those needs. One, and the second question is, so as you explained, we do severity classifications, but if 20% of population exceeds this, let's say, criteria. For example, if it, and we calculate it from top down, from the catastrophic and coming down to the phase 1. So, for example, if let's say phase 5, 3, and 4, and 3 altogether are below 20%, so we cannot consider them at that stage. So, if it is more than 20%, then we say that it is phase 3, right? And in terms of PIN calculation, so what happens in terms of PIN calculation if for example, we consider, let's say, 3% in phase 5, 4% in phase 4, and let's say 8% in phase 3, and then here we stop. So if it is more than 20%, then we stop here. Then we do severity classification and say that we are at step 3, and then 20% or whatever number of population we consider. So what about those 40% or 30% of population who are in phase 2 or in phase 1? They are also in the need. So how do you consider them? This was the second question. Thank you very much. If you put some lights on that.
Okay, so thank you for both questions, actually. For the first one, if you have like incidents or shocks, events happening throughout the year, I mean, you hear me now, or in the presentation, you have seen that the SSC implementation is aligned with the HPC, because this is the main exercise throughout the year for the humanitarian community, right? We need to have our needs overview, we need to have our response plan, because this is how the system is set up. This doesn't mean that the SSC is a one-shot, is a snapshot of the situation that is implemented or conducted or created at August, September. No. If you look at the SSC, it is a living process. It should not stop, actually. And basically, if you have resources, if you have active partners that they share, I mean, I see the question, how much evidence partners should collect? As much as you can. And if you would like, maybe every month, every quarter, you can look back at your analysis and update your shelter needs overview and say, based on this evidence, based on these new shocks, based on these new assessments, our numbers have changed. They might not change in the HNO, they might not change in the HRP. These are documents at the intersectoral level. But for you as a cluster, you can say, our needs has escalated or increased or decreased because of our response, for example, and so on. And for this, I will share here one diagram that we are working on. We are moving the SSC actually from being only at the needs analysis, and this will come to you shortly, like in a few weeks, you will see this coming towards you. So instead of having the SSC only on the needs analysis or context analysis here, we are trying to put the SSC at the whole process. So context analysis, needs analysis, building your strategy as shelter cluster, your response, you have your prioritization and response, and then you have your response monitoring will be connected to the SSC as well. So your 5 Ws later on will be connected to the SSC, and you will see how we will, in the coming months before the new year, you will have the new 5 Ws templates that we should be connected to the SSC, so we are able to measure the impact. So you can see that you are responding to some certain needs. And this circle happens at any frequency that you want. You can, whenever you have some extra information on the analysis, some extra information on the context or something happened, you can adjust and you will see the impact in the whole process. On your second question, let's make it clear. If one person is in need, then we have to consider that person. We have to count that person. No matter what the situation in the village, the city, the town that they live in, if their shelter is damaged, we have to provide response. We have to provide shelter assistance to them, no matter what. So if you have less than 20% in severity 5 or 3, yes, that area or that community has severity 2 or 1, but still there are some people in need in that community. This is one thing. If people are in severity 1 and 2, by definition, according to the YASC principles, they are affected population, but they are not in need of humanitarian assistance. This is how we define it. So population has to be in need, not affected. So if you look at the diagram of population, you have total population, then you have affected population, then you have in need population, and within that you have reached population with some assistance, and then within them you have covered population, because not everyone that you provide assistance to, you meet all of their needs. So this is the diagram, and what we call in severity 1 and 2 are affected population. This is, I hope this is clear here. And I hope I answered the question on what amount of data that partners has to collect. I mean, if you are able to establish that agreement with your partners at the country level to share their evidence, to share their secondary data analysis, to share their assessments that they do, everything, and promote the SSC understanding as the 3 pillars and the indicators and sub-indicators, and try to link all of the elements to those pieces, this will make your life easier throughout the year for you as a cluster coordinator or as a cluster IMO. This is a very basic process that should be established at the country level to know what's happening and to systematize the way we know what's happening. It's not that, yes, I know, as Hussein, myself, I know what's happening today, for example, in X country, but it's not about me. It's about having that documented, well-structured according to a system, which is the SSC. This is how we look at it. Will global cluster support through the process? Of course, Nurta, we will support through the process. We will talk about that later on how we can support the clusters. I have Pepe on the line with your hand raised.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que je peux parler en français?
Oui, oui.
OK. Merci pour la présentation que nous avons vraiment bien appréciée et tous les efforts qui ont été fournis. Et cependant, je voudrais poser une question. J'ai remarqué que la sévérité est calculée sans tenir compte, je ne sais pas, peut-être que c'est tenir en compte, mais ce que je n'ai pas compris, mais que ça ne ressort pas l'ampleur du déplacement. Je donne un exemple. Lorsque le plié 1, le plié 2, le plié 3 ne sont basés que sur les pourcentages, il peut arriver que pour 2 zones de déplacement différentes, avec des ampleurs de déplacement différentes, que nous ayons le même pourcentage et que cela nous conduise à la même sévérité. Et que dans ces cas, nous ne serons pas distingués de quel côté nous avons la plus grande ampleur de déplacement et pour lesquels nous devons agir. Je donne un exemple. Lorsque nous sommes en train de travailler et que dans une zone, nous avons 1000 ménages déplacés et que dans l'autre zone, nous avons 30 000 ménages déplacés, comme nous sommes en train de le vivre au Congo ici, si nous calculons la sévérité que sur les pourcentages et que supposons que j'ai 25% du côté de 1000 et que j'ai 20, ou bien même j'ai 20% du côté de 30 000 et que j'ai 25% du côté de 1000. Vous voyez que je risque d'aller vers le côté 1000 que d'aller le côté où il y a 30 000. Alors que si j'applique ces pourcentages sur ces nombres de population, les 25% de 1000 ne font que 250, alors que même 20% de 30 000, ça fait déjà 6500 ménages. Alors, moi, je me dis que si nous ne trouvons pas le moyen d'inclure l'ampleur du déplacement dans le calcul de la sévérité et que nous ayons, comme c'est déjà fait en Excel, parce que là, le travail va se faire en Excel et puis nous aurons les calculs, nous allons faire les classements, etc., nous risquons, pour deux zones de santé ou pour deux zones différentes, avoir des sévérités qui ne nous permettront pas d'aller du côté où la sévérité pratique réelle est la plus élevée. Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième question que je voudrais poser, c'est que lorsque nous avons affaire à un déplacement, nous avons calculé la sévérité, il serait très important que dans l'avenir, qu'on puisse savoir que lorsque nous faisons de la réponse, c'est-à-dire que si nous apportons de la réponse dans un endroit, cette réponse devrait avoir un impact sur la sévérité. Est-ce que notre sévérité nous permet, en cas d'assistance dans la zone, sans aller sur le terrain, que nous ayons une sévérité correspondante qui se réduit en fonction de l'assistance apportée? Voici mes deux questions, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Pepe. Just for colleagues who don't speak French, I will ask Alex, your hand is up and you're a French speaker. If you can just translate, summarize a little bit the questions. And
Yes.
then I will, yes, please.
Yeah, the question was about severity and people in need. Pepe mentioned that in a district where you have a high number of people and maybe a small, a lower severity, because there is big population, the number of people in need of shelter, that would be in severity 5, for instance, could be very high, even if the severity of the district is low. So I think we need to explain that we can use the people in need number, which is very important to maybe prioritize some of the district, even if the severity is low.
Yeah, exactly. And
I can also,
yeah, please go ahead for the second question.
Answer in French. Yes, the second question was about the response. When we have a severity, a high severity in one location, and if there is a response following this needs assessment, would we adjust the severity after the response?
Yeah, okay. So I'll start with I will reply to your questions, Pepe, in English, if possible. And if there's something missed, we can translate to French. But just to mention as well, we will have a French session in like 20 minutes, 25 minutes at 3:15. The same presentation will be facilitated in French as well for colleagues who didn't capture the English version, if you are interested in joining that session. So to answer your questions, first of all, if you let me share my screen, sorry. So when we look at this, if I have a population here of 1,000, I will have, for example, here 5%, 3%, and 25%, right? I have a number of people in need. If this number goes big, this number will go big for sure. Here we are, here we are talking about the scale of the need. The severity is 3. No matter if there are 1 million in need of severity 3 or 100 in that district in need of population because or 300 because the population is 3. Like if I put this the same, I'll increase the population. Let me just put the same here. So both are in severity 3, right? But here I have 330. Here I have, I don't know how much this 3,300,000, right? Because the population is 10 million in this district. This goes for all population groups as well. If you have IDPs, if you have host community, returnees, IDPs displaced last year means that they might have more needs than IDPs who have been in that district for many years. So this distinction will go beyond the needs. Here we are talking about only the needs. And this will lead us to your next question, the second one. When you talk about prioritization and the impact of our response. Again, I was showing this diagram because the needs analysis, we are talking about the need. Who is in need and what is the scale of their need? What is the severity of their need? We are not talking about the scale in the area. When it comes to prioritization, here you need to look at how many people are in that area. You need to look at access factors. You need to look at population group factor. You need to look at how many years people has been displaced, or if they are newly displaced, if they have displaced several times or only once, many other factors to prioritize, to see which area you need to prioritize in your response or in your projects. And this goes beyond the analysis of the needs. They are all in need. If one household is a host community and their house is damaged and their neighbor is an IDP and their house is damaged, both are in need of shelter and both count. We cannot say, this host community, so they are not in need because we need to focus on the IDPs. When we describe the situation, we describe it fairly across everyone. And we tell this area, for example, and here when it comes to, when we talk about the percentage of population in need on the high pin or low pin, if I look at these flags, here I'm trying to figure out if my population in need, if I put this up about 50%, you see it's flagged. It says that I have some high pin here in that area, means the percentage of the people in need in that area is very high, like 90% of, or 50%, 80% in this example here are in need. That means something. And that has to be captured in your analysis. But when you present your figure, you need to tell that this area has 8 million of people in need. They are 80% of the population of the area. This means that this area is a high priority for us, the shelter cluster, because of 1, 2, 3. I hope I am answering your question here. And then you move to prioritization, impact analysis, as we show in here, and then how the impact, the response, the impact that you create by your response affects the context and affects the crisis and create an impact on the lives of the people. Here we need to pay attention to the fact that we don't withdraw as a humanitarian just because the people are living at severity 2, and if we withdraw, their severity will be 5. We need to pay attention to this, and we need to find a way to capture it. Unfortunately, across the humanitarian class context or sector, we don't have that analysis yet. What if the humanitarian assistance disappears from one country, what will happen? We don't have an agreed upon methodology or framework or understanding on how we measure and capture that factor. I mean, if you have any good examples of that, that would be really appreciated to share with us, and we try to find ways on how we can manage to include it in this framework. I hope I answered your questions, Pepe. And then, Alex, I have your hand up. We still have 1 minute here, but we can take a couple of more minutes if colleagues allows.
It was just a comment regarding the question from Pepe, because he mentioned people displaced and not people in need of shelter. So I think it's important to mention that this is a shelter severity, so it's about the people in need of shelter, not necessarily the displacement. So
yeah, exactly.
This could also look at non-displaced population, and it should be needs-based and not status-based. But of course, you have more vulnerability when you are displaced. But
definitely. I see 2 hands up here. None. Lala, Pepe, your hands were up, and then now they are not there. Pepe, come in.
Oui, I'm coming, je reviens. Bon, peut-être qu'il y aura des discussions bilatérales, mais lorsque il y a le déplacement, déjà les formules utilisées avec le pilier 1, le pilier 2, le pilier 3, les calculs qui vont être faits, ça ne sera pas seulement pour dire qu'il y a le nombre de déplacés. Ça sera le besoin en abri, c'est la sévérité en abri qui est calculée. Donc, en posant la question relative au nombre de personnes, je pose la question sur la sévérité calculée. C'est-à-dire que il peut arriver, comme je l'ai dit, que le nombre de personnes dans le besoin en abri dans un point A et le nombre de personnes dans le besoin dans un point B puissent avoir la même sévérité calculée. C'est ce que j'ai dit. Mais sans pour autant que les deux chiffres ne soient égaux. Et si cela arrive, la sévérité, si on s'appuie seulement que sur la sévérité, c'est-à-dire que sur le chiffre de la sévérité, parce que c'est la sévérité qui nous a aidé à calculer les PIN.
I get your point, Pepe. I get your point. Look, in your context, when you have shelter sector alone and NFI sector standalone, you implement the full SSC for each sector. You implement it separately. Here, what we talk about when we talk, let me share my screen again. When we talk about 3 pillars, when we say about the shelter, the living conditions, and the access to services, that's why we named the pillars like this. We don't call pillars 2 and 5. We don't call them by the response. We call them by the need. People are in need of shelter. Yes, we provide shelter. People are in need to have domestic, functional domestic space, and to respond to those needs, we provide NFIs. In your context, you have the 2 sectors separate. So when we look at the needs of NFI, and we had this example from Syria last year, they implemented that, and they implemented 2 different analysis grids for each of the sectors. So you have to define what informs your shelter situation, what informs your NFI situation under the 3 pillars, because the NFI situation is not affected only by pillar 2, but also by pillar 3 through access to market, and by pillar 1 through having a structure to live in, right? So it's not only about, I mean, let me put it again in this way. The SSC is not about the response, it's about the needs, mainly. So we look at it's from the population perspective, not from our own perspective. We, as humanitarians, we look at what we can provide, what we provide. But the SSC is primarily to allow us to understand what the people think about their situation. Yes, we want to divide them into two different sectors, NFI and shelter. Of course, you can do that. Then you have to implement two SSCs, one for shelter, one for NFI, and you need to define your information needs for shelter sector and for NFI sector, and you implement it. And in this way, you will have a different pin for NFI and a different pin for shelter. And not everyone in need for shelter, they will be in need for NFI, for example, and vice versa. And so on, you can distinguish between both types of need, as if you are doing shelter needs analysis and health needs analysis, more or less similar to, because you are splitting the cluster into two. But we can have this bilateral discussion, of course. I'm sorry, we are over time, and the other session will start in 10 minutes in French. If you would like, we can continue this discussion up until 3:15 for 10 more minutes if you want, if there are more questions. If not, we can stop here, because I don't see any hands up. And in the chat, I see more question. One here: what kind of information do you recommend? Have you used only administrative records that was for service? So for the admin information, this is what is called the scope of analysis that will be defined by GF at the intersectoral level, because all clusters, they should provide a minimum level of analysis at the administrative level, admin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And the other one is at the population groups. What type of population groups? I remember in, I think in Somalia last year, there were population IDPs, new IDP or old IDPs 2 years ago. So they distinguished between newly displaced or already displaced for many years. So depends, but this has to be unique or in line with the other clusters. And if you would like to go more granular, you have more information, you are welcome, but you need to sum up and summarize that information at the same level with other clusters for the GF and for the intersectoral analysis. Okay.
Hi, Hussein.
Yes.
Sorry, maybe just quick question, but I sorry that I know that we are over time now. Just like wanted to know that how frequently are we required to it is first like all, do we as organizations need to report for this, or and also if yes, then what would be the frequency, and then the amount of data that expected per organization, per province, or something. Thank you.
Yeah, like for needs analysis, usually the minimum is once per year. And this exercise usually is led by the cluster, by the coordination team at the cluster level. They engage with partners, they engage the scope of analysis in which parts of the country, etc. This happens at the cluster and intercluster level. Then what type of information that partner organizations are required or asked to collect, report, and at which frequency, this has to be at the agreement between the coordination team, between the cluster and the partners. There is no recommendation here, because we don't collect information just to collect information. We cannot recommend that. Based on the capacity to analyze that information, based on the agreements, based on the need of that information, and so on. So this discussion has to happen at the country level and to go under agreement between the cluster partners and the cluster coordination team. Okay, I'll stop here because I don't see hands up. I don't see more questions in the chat. I'll stop recording now. We will post the recording on the Shelter Cluster website. We will share the recordings as well with all of you. Looking forward to the next session in French, just in 5-10 minutes. I will be there in the session as well. It will be facilitated by Elsa, our colleague, because my French is not that good to facilitate the session, and you will hear another voice than mine. As well, just a reminder for the session on next Thursday at the same time, and we will look at how to implement SSC in different contexts from household level data and how to adapt other type of data sets to be used under the SSC framework. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you so much for your contributions, and looking forward to the next sessions. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Hussein.